my heart of hearts, stick figure animation will always be synonymous with the good old days. Back in the early 2000s internet frontier. Back when this wonderful playground was the Wild West with so few rules and no corporations gaining the system.
Bitch! Oh shit! Now back up, put the gun down, and give me a pack of tropical fruit Bubblicious and some Skittles.
There was so much wonderful stick figure fight animation made in this period of time. The earliest examples of stick figure animation I could find was from an old JavaScript advice website back in 1996. Animator versus animation. And ever since then, a bottomless rabbit hole of this art style was beginning to form. Plenty of early Flash games used this style. If you go back to old sites like Newgrounds or Addicting Games, it's literally categorized as its own genre. Addicting Games was actually my first real exposure to video games ever, I'm pretty sure. I remember when my parents brought the computer home and I was learning how to use it faster than they were. From the wonderfully kinetic Matrix vibing Electric Man 2, the violent two-player turn-based strategy Territory War, which really wanted you to abuse headshots. Escape the Prison, a choose-your-own-adventure story with delightful and violent gags. And Ace Attorney references. I could go on and on about how many stick figures were running across the internet back then. This trend was in part due to practical purposes. With limited hardware and data storage, simplicity was rewarded back then. And it also made it more user-friendly. If you want to become a 2D animator but don't have any experience, starting with the stick figure is probably wiser than, say, pixel art. You can find numerous tutorial videos about stick figure animation and how beginner-friendly it is. Most of these animations were passion projects made by people exploring the internet frontier. In my heart, I dub the stick figure style as caveman animation. Not as an insult, but because it's what dominated the early web age, and you could find stick figures on caveman painting. Like, come on, this image is the most primordial, artistic depiction of humans. And this is by no means a dead genre. More Flash games are popping up on these sites all the time. I even played a few newer ones in preparation for this video. My favorite finding is Ninja.io, a simple but fun online multiplayer shoot-em-up. But today I want to talk about one game in particular. One from my childhood which has been remastered for desktop downloading. And it even landed on PlayStation Network. The game I'm talking about is Super Fancy Pants Adventure. An adaptation of Fancy Pants Adventure. A 2D platformer that screams early 2000s cool aesthetic, and it aged like a fine wine. Visually, Fancy Pants distinguishes himself from your average stick figure with, predictably, his fancy pants. What a difference two triangles can make. But another notable thing about Fancy Pants is that his animations are smooth like butter. Just let me zoom in and look at this man and how he parkours through the stage like he owns it. There's a frantic element to his run, and look how his legs do circles in midair. I'm especially a fan of his backflip. They really get a lot of mileage out of that one animation in particular. It's just so fun, and look at how great the pole spin is. I can watch this fancy boy flip-flop and run through the simplistic doodle world forever. Now for those of you paying attention, the way Fancy Pants moves might remind you of someone. Momentum is key in Fancy Pants. And because of how momentum is used with all the winding slopes, the closest comparison I can make to Fancy Pants is Sonic the Hedgehog. It just really feels like a Sonic game, sometimes. It's far easier for Fancy to gain momentum than Sonic, but he's not as fast. But any platform game where rolling down a hill is a legitimate maneuver is gonna feel like Sonic. And there's more than enough difference here to not only distinguish Fancy from Sonic, but to give Fancy a more methodical feel of control. Like when you run up a slope onto the ceiling, Fancy gains more height if you let him run off, but he'll have more speed if you jump right at the end. Or in this early challenge stage, it's not just about timing your jumps right, but making sure you don't jump any higher than you need to in order to build up your momentum and to keep it. Like jumping on a downward slope will increase your speed like twice over. There's stuff like that. My presumption of Sonic influence might be totally off the mark, but it makes it more enjoyable for me when I think about it that way. And Fancy has plenty of abilities 2D Sonic doesn't, like wall jumping, sword fighting, and pen machine gun. The way these techniques need to be combined for challenges is exactly what I want from a good platformer. a diverse moveset that I have to mix and master with to get to the end of each challenge. There are some moves like the kick which I wish got more use throughout the game, but given it's a small game, I don't want to ask too much when I'm already enjoying myself so much. The door challenge rooms is where the game puts the amazing controls to its best use. Lots of fun challenges that really force you to learn the logic behind Fancy's momentum. The visuals are simple and crisp and playful. The colors are soft and inviting, the foreground and background are constantly played with throughout the game, and I love little touches like how your health bubble will match whatever color and pattern pants you're equipped. And look at this fire hat, isn't that so awesome? Look at it! And sometimes it'll completely change things up like in the World 1 remaster. The way the cool blues and inky blacks contrast in this area is just so darn cool. Speaking of the World 1 remaster, it ends with a really cool boss fight where you fight a giant pencil that constantly obstructs your path, creates enemies, and tries to poke at you. You guys remember the animator versus animation video I showed you before? Yeah, this boss fight seems to be a clear reference to that. And that's so insanely cool. I love it when a piece of media wears its inspirations on its sleeve. Puts a warm feeling in my chest. Besides that, there are only 4 other boss fights in the game. The first of which is disappointingly short, the second of which is fine, third of which is pretty cool, and the fourth of which I won't spoil here because it's so wacky, man, and meta. Combat in general isn't deep or anything, but it breaks up the pace well enough. The story is very simple, but it had enough interesting set pieces and characters to hold my attention, and they are all paced with brevity and a decent sense of humor. When I finished my first session of Super Fancy Pants Adventures, all I could think was, I am so lucky that I get to play video games. Seriously, this game belongs on the Nintendo Switch. And I want a sequel, or more remasters. I want more Fancy Pants. It's not a very long game, but it can keep your attention for a weekend, or maybe even a full week if you want 100% it. There's plenty of side missions to beat and collectibles to unlock. Although if you just play through it once without any difficulty, you might just burn through it in an afternoon, which can be fun as well. I also played the older Fancy Pants games online, however because I couldn't hook up my controller I didn't have as much fun, but the level design and animation is still on par with the remaster. I highly recommend Super Fancy Pants Adventures. If anything you saw in this video interested you, it's free to download for PC use and you can find a link to it in the description below. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Like, sub, you know the drill, and I hope you have a good one. Stick figure forever.